Good morning on this Sunday, December 25th. Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. Welcome to the Georgia Gang. After much negotiation, the City of Atlanta Jail opens its doors to inmates from Fulton County. Also, Atlanta is in the running to host the Democratic National Convention in 2024. And the special grand jury investigating former President Trump and his aides for potential election interference gets closer to a decision on whether to recommend charges. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
The first wave of Fulton County inmates, all of them women, are now in the Atlanta City Jail. After years of negotiations, lawyers gave Fulton County Sheriff Pat Labatt and Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens the green light to move inmates from the Fulton County facility to Atlanta to help relieve overcrowding. Fox 5 obtained a copy of the contract, which calls for a phased approach of 100 inmates per month. Phil, this was a long time coming.
Yes, better late than never. But we needed this, as you point out, to help with the overcrowding. And the Fulton Jail was a humanitarian disgrace. Obviously, we have a rising crime rate, so we needed the jail. It was insanity to keep the city jail barely closed, keeping the lights on for all this time. The taxpayers were wasting all this money to keep it up. So this is a great thing.
Theron, was this a good deal for the city of Atlanta?
Well, I think it's a good deal for the city of Atlanta and Fulton County, and our viewers should know that this is just a short-term solution. So this is not a long-term deal that the city has entered into Fulton County. But you really got to highlight the relationship between Sheriff Labatt and now Mayor Andre Dickens. When Sheriff Labatt was the chief of the detention center, him and Andre Dickens had a really good relationship. And then also there were a lot of councilmen who expressed some concerns about this transfer. But ultimately, I think I agree with Phil. It takes people off the floor at the Fulton County Jail. It will give the Fulton County Jail an opportunity to make sure that everyone is getting the proper service. And if you talk to Sheriff Labatt, he'll tell you he's spending a lot of money on just treating the mentally ill folks that are in jail. So good short-term solution, and everyone should be commended.
Martha, there was a lot of talk about turning the Atlanta City Jail into something else and closing it, but that's not going to happen anytime soon now.
No, I don't think so. And in full disclosure, my husband is the detention center physician at the Hall County Jail, so we know a little bit about all this. And to your point, the mental health issue is a really important component of all of this. Not just the movement of needing or more people being housed and what they need, but I think this is the right thing to do. The Atlanta City Jail, I mean, it should not have been closed, and it's going to be put to a good purpose now. I think it was a good deal all the way around.
Melita.
Well, I think it's a good solution, and it gives time for the city to determine the future of this very expensive facility in the years to come.
Well, we'll move on because they may need the room at the Fulton County Jail because the Atlanta homicide rate has increased for the third straight year. We're now at more than 160 homicides this year, the most in 26 years in the city of Atlanta. Melita, I know we talk a lot about crime on this show, but do you believe that Atlanta leaders and really Metro Atlanta leaders are doing everything that they possibly can to get a handle on this situation?
I believe they are, and I believe there's great sincerity when Mayor Dickens and the police chief show up at crime scenes. And we've seen the Atlanta Police Department have a much higher rate of solving cases, especially murder cases, than many other cities of the same size. And so Atlanta is putting the resources behind solving crimes, and there is a very heartfelt feeling of trying to reduce crime from the mayor and the police chief.
Martha, we talk about the Atlanta City Police doing their jobs and getting the arrests of these murderers off the streets. Fulton County, though, are the courts doing enough?
You know, look, I don't think so, and I think that what's got to happen is none of this is happening fast enough for the people that are reading about this every day, and I think that's part of the problem. I don't think it's the case that the mayor hasn't tried to put things in place. I listened to an interview on Friday morning with the new Atlanta police chief, and, you know, he was talking about how he believes Atlanta is a safe place. It's a shining place, and look, I know a little bit of that is boosterism. Do you know what I mean? Because if people feel like it's not safe, they're going to act like it's not safe. safe, and there's a little bit of a mental health issue as far as how that relates too. So we've got, look, Fulton County's got to do more. I think it was, we'll get to the Fulton County grand jury later, but that was a waste of resources, I believe, that could have been spent better on dealing with issues related to crime. It deters people, it distracts people, and we don't need that right now.
Farron, I think what worries me the most about the crime that we're reading about is the kids that are involved. I mean, these are teenagers who are shooting and killing, and also the victims.
Well, if you look at the newly proposed budget for next year, the city of Atlanta is basically their largest line item budget item is to reduce crime. So it's not a money problem. So the city of Atlanta definitely is putting, I think, upwards of $236 million into the budget to deal with cameras and to deal with public safety. But Lori, you're talking about two things that I want to highlight, and that is definitely our youth are being recruited by gangs. And we also got to talk about the issue around income inequality and poverty in this city. All of those are directly linked. But the other thing that we got to talk about is the access to guns. You're going to hear me talk about that over and over again. It's not that people who are law-abiding citizens to carry the guns who've gone through the right procedures, but I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is that people like us, law-abiding citizens, do not feel safe in this region, not just in this city, but in this state. And so I think the leaders are going to come together to make sure that responsible gun owners own your guns, but it's the people who are getting access to guns illegally or legally and that are using them to kill people. That's an issue that we got to solve next year.
Phil, I know that you had always talked about, giving Mayor Andre Dickens, a good amount of time to try to figure this out. How do you think he's doing with the new police chief?
I think the glass is half full. We're making some progress. You've heard me say on the show that I do like some of the things that the new chief, Shearbaum, is doing. I'm glad he was made chief by the mayor. I do think that the chief needs a little messaging along with the mayor and city council. We want to be safer. We are not a safe city, but we want to be safer. And we allude to the young people, which is very sad. Of course, this goes back to the gang problem, which is a huge issue in Atlanta and also statewide. Our prisons, and we can talk about this, are the big recruiting centers for the gangs, too. We need to talk about that at some point. And of course, Lori and Martha hit upon the courts. If the city really wants to do something, they need to stop no cash bail in this revolving door. You've heard me point out, Sandy Springs, our magistrates, we jail these felons for at least 6 months. In Atlanta, all too often, they're off on the streets and the next day. That's very disturbing for the police. I am glad Theron pointed out about the funding. I think that's one good plus. I do think that we're working on recruitment and retention. Let's give them another year and see what happens.
The city's moving in the right direction.
I think that's fair.
Yes. In a unanimous decision, Georgia Supreme Court says a state pledge to not execute some inmates following the COVID-19 pandemic is binding. Tuesday's ruling could delay some executions moving forward. Phil, what's the story here?
Well, there was an email sent that said we're going to agree to this and that, and I think that should be binding. And I think that that's how you have to make arrangements. And yes, we're dealing with criminals and all of that, but I think that it's a very weak case to say, oh, we don't want to. We gave our word, but now we don't want to give our word.
Melita?
Well, that's what Judge Charles Bethel pointed out, that, quote, everyone should be able to count on the state to honor its word. And that was the crux of the case, and the judges were displeased that the Attorney General tried to appeal.
Yeah, I mean, it was a rebuke on Attorney General Carr's office. I mean, if you really read the story, in which I did, I mean, they say that it was unanimous Supreme Court decision to strongly condemn the Attorney General's Chris Carr's office for backtracking on agreement, halting most executions during the COVID-19 era. And so I think that, look, you've seen the Attorney General's office definitely work well with the courts, but I think that, look, we got to figure out who's going to do what and who's going to hold each other responsible. And I think that this story definitely deserves some attention, but ultimately I think the two entities will come together to do the right thing.
Martha?
Well, you saw the Supreme Court rule unanimously, and I think that honestly it's all been said already that this was a bad day for the Attorney General's office. Doesn't mean he's going to have a bad week or a year or a second term. It was a bad day for the Attorney General's office.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, could Atlanta land the Democratic National Convention? We discuss the chances and the competition coming up.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
City of Atlanta leaders are making a big push to bring the Democratic National Convention to Georgia come 2024. That could mean 5,000 delegates and 45,000 other visitors to the Peach State. Theron, you need to give us some of the inside scoop here because I know you got some, and y'all were so agreeable in the first blog. We'll see if this holds.
No, listen, it is a group of men and women that have come together, led by Mayor Dickens, that are actually making a tremendous appeal to the Democratic National Committee of why Georgia, particularly Atlanta, should host this convention. Now, we're in competition with places like Chicago, Illinois, and I think New York was in the running once upon a time, and maybe Texas, I think Houston. But the thing that I think that really put us in a good position was the re-election of Senator Warnock. If we could not re-elect our incumbent U.S. Senator, I think Georgia would not have been in the actual conversation. But the fact of the matter is that we've delivered a Senate majority to the Biden administration now twice. You know, we sent Ossoff and Warnock up there the first time, and then we're sending Warnock back. The last thing I would say is that the Convention and Visitors Bureau will play a pivotal role in this. We got to make sure that we have the hotels. I think we definitely understand the economic impact that it will have on our economy, and then safety is going to be a big concern. But look, if you got to choose between going to a place like Chicago and Atlanta, and I just know a lot of these delegates, they're going to want to come and kick it in Atlanta versus in Chicago.
Which one has the less murder rate? Is that what you're saying?
I didn't check.
But Phil, let me ask you this. I mean, can this be feasible when you have a Republican slate of statewide office holders, with the exception of Senators Ossoff and Warnock?
Sure, it can be feasible, and you know, this will be a big boost for Atlanta and the Atlanta region. We all like to see conventions and tourism. It gives the Republicans a great platform too, because when you hear a lot of this nonsense and half-truths and lies during the convention, you know, if the media is being fair, you're going to hear both sides. You're going to hear Governor Kemp and other Republicans. It'll be a great debate.
We're capitalists. We're glad. If a big thing
Bring
like
anybody.
that comes, it's good.
Melita,
It's good
Atlanta
for the
versus
economy.
Chicago.
Well, I
Oh,
think
no doubt.
former Senator from Alabama, Doug Jones, made a stunning case for Atlanta. And the op-ed penned by former Mayor Andrew Young talking about the civil rights history of Atlanta and the unification that it will give to the Democratic Party to have this convention in Atlanta. And then the catchy phrase about make good trouble with us. It's all coming together in a nice way.
And I can't leave this out. We actually gave Biden a win in 2020 as well. So I want to leave that out. Not only did we send 2 U.S. senators, I think that with the appeal to try to move us up in the actual primary calendar, I think that's another good thing.
It does show
I'm
we're
hoping-
a purple state.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
does show
and
that.
former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms is up there,
Yeah,
probably.
she's up there.
And
Kicking
I'm
it.
hoping the same thing happens as after the 1988 convention, that Democrats lose up and down the ticket.
I knew
There's that
that was coming.
history. We knew it was coming. Well, this week, Greg Bluestein of the AJCU reported some interesting details about the Abrams campaign leading up to the November election, and Axios actually provided more insight. Theron, I want to ask you first. $103 million raised. Yet, according to Axios, the campaign cannot afford to pay some vendors and is $1 million in debt. How does this happen?
You know, this is terrible. And what's really been most disturbing to me, Lori, is that I'm probably one of the only, maybe Melita, few Democrats that are willing to talk about this publicly. I mean, if you look at this, $103 million. Take the fact that it's a campaign. Any organization, any nonprofit, any sort of startup business, if you mismanage the money the way that it was mismanaged, that person, he or she would be fired, never ever allowed to do that business again. And it really kind of showed that. The thing that disturbs me also, look, one of the things when I run campaigns, and you all know this, you guys have all been involved in campaigns, you always pay your people, and you always set aside, even if it doesn't mean paying yourself, to make sure that your staff is paid. And the fact that you have people on the record saying, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills in January. And so this all falls on Stacey Abrams. This all falls on Lauren. And I got on the show and tried to defend why they were cutting back the money on television. I thought it was going to the field. Well, clearly, it didn't work, and you spend this much money and you lose by the margin that you lost. But the shame on Democrats if we're going to sit back and not talk about this. There are so many people within our party who are scared to talk about it because you're scared of the backlash, but this was terrible. And it makes it harder for future Democrats in this state to raise money from donors, because donors are going to basically think twice about giving money to Democrats who run for office if you have this type of mismanagement.
Well, you mentioned Lauren, and we should say Lauren Grow-Wargo is our campaign manager. Melita, who's to blame here? And how do you to Theron's point, how do you raise money going forward? Now, Raphael Warnock ran a great campaign.
Well, and other candidates raised good money. The key cornerstones of every campaign are stay on message and stay on budget. And so the leaders of the campaign have to take responsibility for the debt. It's not the first campaign to be in debt. It's a greater amount in a campaign that raised record-setting sums. But debt is not uncommon in political campaigns. But it is a poor example for aspiring candidates who think they can just run up debt. You have to stay on budget. You have to stay on message.
Phil, we talked a lot, leading up to the November election. We couldn't believe that Stacey Abrams was pulling back on the airwaves. Well, now we know why.
Now we know why, yeah, and I appreciate what Theron said about that, and I appreciate what Melita said. It's a disgrace. And what I really don't like, and I don't think the donors and the vendors are going to like, is that Abrams is saying now to reduce the debt, she's going to be selling her donor base and her voter database. There's some privacy concerns there. I don't know how many people would want that out there.
Well, those are publicly acknowledged donors through campaign disclosures. So the fact that those donors have to be disclosed anyway is just selling the list.
Do you want to get your inbox filled with all sorts of donor?
I want to bring Martha in because
please?
she's worked on several campaigns, probably some that have run out of money. But has this ever happened?
Oh, I'm sure it's happened before. I mean, I think Newt Gingrich, at the end of his presidential campaign, he owed like $12 million. But this isn't a presidential campaign. It's a local campaign. And I do think that one of the problems is it seems that the campaign manager was a little more interested in having fights on Twitter than actually managing a campaign. And they thought they would never run out of money. They weren't running this in a judicious way. And I think if they had included a lot more local talent in their campaign, they might have had that message earlier. But there was this kind of deity that was put around Stacey Abrams. And look, it has to be at her feet too. I mean, I know a much smaller campaign, okay, that I was in when I ran for Congress, but every decision I was included on. And I knew how much money we had in the bank. And I also, the first thing I said is the people that are working for me have to be paid, even if we can't do other things.
And we need to point out, Martha's from Georgia. She knows Georgia.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of outside consultants.
Yeah, let me tell you the other thing that
campaign.
I'm going to speak up and say. The lack of Georgia-based, competent, qualified Democratic operatives, organizations not being on this Abrams campaign was just unbelievable. I mean, there were so many people. I can list you 10 folks that I know that have actually won races in Georgia that were basically shut out. And so when we look at this mismanagement, look, with that much money, that race is supposed to be tighter. I don't care who you are. $100 million. I mean, how do you mismanage that? And the thing that I think that's also the most upsetting is that you really prided yourself off basically being a person who, if elected governor, you could manage the budget. And I'm already going to say what Phil is going to probably say, is that you clearly displayed that you or your team couldn't do that. And so, a lot of local people were left out. And we're mad because we see all this money going to these folks in Chicago, San Francisco, New York. Nothing wrong with those folks. A lot of those folks are my friends. But the inability to empower local consultants was a big mistake on her part.
Well, y'all have a Christmas spirit and are agreeing so much. So we'll see if we can rile you up in the next block. Up next, the Fulton County Special Grand Jury investigating former President Donald Trump and its allies for election interference could be close to wrapping up. We'll discuss next steps after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
After months of testimony and a parade of high-profile politicos called to testify, the Fulton County Special Grand Jury looking into whether former President Trump and some of his aides interfered with this 2020 elections is expected to wrap up pretty soon. Martha, the grand jury does not have the power to issue indictments, but it can make recommendations to DA Fonnie Willis.
Look, I think it's been a waste of money and time, and I think that Fonnie Willis had much bigger problems as it relates to Fulton County, and actually does a great job at that. The district attorney job, where she's prosecuting clients and she got the money allocated to catch up and that sort of thing, that was great. That's what her job is as district attorney. She did this because it was politically expedient, and I think it was a waste of money.
Melita, waste of money?
I don't believe that it was a waste of money, because some of this fake elector stuff and trying to find the votes, the Trump phone call, is Fulton County centered. And Georgia has better RICO statutes than even the federal government. And so it's not a waste of money. We'll just have to wait and see. The final report is up to the jury, not Fonnie Willis. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens once not just Judge McBurney, but the entire Fulton County Superior Court bench looks over the report and decides what the next steps are.
We'll have a lot to talk about when the report comes out. I want to move on. On Tuesday, the Georgia Public Service Commission approved a $1.8 billion rate increase for Georgia Power, raising rates by 12% over 3 years, and that's about $3.60 per month, more a month for the average customers come next year. Phil, Theron and I both do work for Georgia Power, but I want to ask you, I thought this was a good compromise considering where both sides started.
I thought it was reasonable too, because it's phased in, as we point out, and the whole energy picture around the country, and Georgia is no exception, costs are going up. The good news is we have Plant Vogtle near Waynesboro, and that's going to really, when that kicks in with those last 2 units coming online, that's going to really help still. And I want to emphasize this, we still have some of the lowest electric rates in the country. And so if we put all this in perspective, nobody likes a rate hike, but I think it's reasonable. And I think that, like I say, we're in good shape nationally.
Martha, we're paying more for everything, so I guess we can just assume we'll be paying more for our power. But we don't also have the problems that we've seen in California and Texas, and then you saw North Carolina, they had issues with the security of some of their transmission lines.
Well, I want to tip of the hat to Tim Eccles, because as soon as this ruling came out, I reached out to him, and he, within 5 minutes, was on the phone with me on the show explaining all of the things that happened. And that's what you need, is that kind of accountability. But what I would say is, in Texas and in California, there has been a lot of privatizing of their grid. Okay, Georgia Power has a grid that works, and they spend the time every 3 years looking at what it's going to take to actually make that power grid work and how they can keep it going. If you remember Hurricane Sandy a number of years ago, those people in the Northeast were out of power, and then the Georgia Power and Southern Company people got there and said, hey, get out of the way, we'll get your power restored, and they did. So yes, we're paying a little more, but again, to your point, we're paying more for everything. If you think that energy is going to be exempt for all the supply chain issues and that kind of thing. Look, I don't like to pay more either, and I think the timing was terrible, but the timing was predetermined because it's a 3-year cycle, and I think that's good too, because then they can't use timing to go in their favor. It just happens when it happens.
All right, one more issue I want to get to, because this is a good story, a funny story. According to the Reporter newspaper in Sandy Springs, the council there learned municipalities do not have the authority to regulate hunting. Several residents have complained at recent council meetings about trespassing bow hunters. Phil.
Well, as a resident of Sandy Springs, I want the law upheld. Now, there is a law that you have to have a permit to hunt on either public or private property. So that's where you can crack down on some of this.
Melita?
Well, this is a problem in Hunt Cliff, which is a lovely golf course community built in a curve of the Chattahoochee River. I lived there for about 10 years, and those deer are practically neighborhood pets. And I don't see the sportsmanship of shooting Bambi that comes and practically eats out of your hand with a bow and arrow, and certainly not to just harvest the trophy that you might hang on the wall and leave the carcass there. It's just not very sporting to kill neighborhood treasures like this.
Martha, I told you this would be a fun debate.
It is a fun debate because, ironically, on Thursday we had a group of young men bow hunting on our property for deer, because we have so many deer and we love them. We think they're cute, but 20 of them in our backyard is a lot to deal with. So I have a little experience with this issue, but they were there with permission.
With permission, and that's the key.
And we were gonna, they're gonna process it and we're gonna eat it, so it'll be great. But I get what people are concerned about, but and they should have permission to be on someone's property.
And people are very concerned about their kids and their pets too, as well, so let's not leave them out.
Absolutely. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Melita, you've been gone from us for a while, so we'll start with you.
Great, thanks. Well, I want to start by wishing the Georgia Bulldogs a new victory in their undefeated season during the Peach Bowl on New Year's Eve. The city of Atlanta made Shirley Franklin a winner when they named the former Bellwood Quarry for her. And then I want to acknowledge the loss of former Congressman Elliot Levitas, who was the first Jewish congressman for the state of Georgia, and he was a brilliant, brilliant man.
Phil.
Well, I think the Augusta National over in Augusta ought to be a winner because obviously they host the Masters tournament every April, and they announced this past week that all eligible golfers can play, regardless if they're in the PGA Tour or if they're in the new upstart LIV circuit. So there was a lot of worry in Augusta that some of those players could be banned, but I think that's a winner for Augusta National. My loser, sad to say, is the Department of Corrections. I see where they're getting a new commissioner. We have had some serious problems in that area with regard to contraband coming in, gang recruitment in the prisons. It's got to be cleaned up.
Theron.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Yes.
Definitely agree with Melita. Big shout out to Mayor Franklin for her recent recognition, and also the City of Atlanta for completing its initial phase of 10,000 additional lights. This is a partnership between the City of Atlanta and Georgia Power. I think they're going to exceed that 10,000 goal. So the Atlanta Department of Transportation, the mayor, Georgia Power, all working together.
Martha.
Merry Christmas to everyone. And I'm going to kind of do my winner of the year because I won't be on the end of year of broadcasting. It's got to be Governor Brian Kemp. He wove together a majority that is going to stand up, and a lot of good work's going to be done.
Great. We'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and we will see you next week. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.